Hello everybody, it is Mike Levin on Saturday, June 25th, 2022. Tomorrow's the Pride Day parade. Can't wait to get into the city with my kid, and I'll be picking them up tonight. This is my last run over to the storage facility to drop off some stuff to lighten my move, and then I'll pack the car with foofs, which are a kind of beanbag, but really big and not bad for sleeping on. I'll also load the kids' mattress and stuff. It'll be sort of camping out tonight. I'm currently in conversation with someone named Alex Salazar on my million view, approaching 2 million view removable finger video. And I apparently, touch a lot of people's lives through that video. My mailman touched my life, and I in turn have spread that gift. And I am talking to a number of unlikely people, and one of them is Alex Salazar, who, at first is like, "Hey, what's up, Mikey?" And I answer him, and I think these kids are taken aback that I take the time to answer. I try and answer every single one of my YouTube videos. If they took the time to post to me, if they, paid the honor of, watching something that I published and comment, I owe it to them to say something back. Sometimes I'm taken in by trolls. Sometimes it's somewhere on the spectrum between people trolling and people being sincere. And a lot of times I find that the young kids come off a little bit like trolls, but then have just under the surface a surprising depth of sincerity, like Alex Salazar. So, after going back and forth a few times, I explained to him that I'm trying to transition people from magic tricks to another kind of magic trick, which is mastering tech. It's all tricks. And with much the same kind of attention to gaming detail that people put into level achieving games, and with much the same reward system of the dopamine release, you can do the exact same thing that you do in gaming, but you can do it to improve your life. And I know that sounds like, blah, blah, adult stuff, but if you could do something which makes you into the same kind of hacker person that you see in the movies, but, minus the hacking, and add the stuff everyone finds valuable today in the modern world, everything from web development to pushing data around to, laying the foundation for artificial intelligence, right? It doesn't just come out of nowhere. It takes people putting things in place. So if you get addicted to that very process, you can get the same dopamine reward level seeking dynamic that games give you. And I think Alex was quite taken aback that I gave him a sincere answer like that. I even went into ikigai, and aligning what you love to do, what you're naturally good at, what you can get paid for with what the world needs. There's a lot of that going on now. There's a lot that, is very rewarding in life, spiritually, financially, and I guess that covers it. Spiritually covers a lot, and financially covers a lot. So when you can have an interest, when you have something you love that feeds both those hungers, you're in a good place. And so I am updating my public website, mikelev.in, where I'm making much more emphasis on how my name is pronounced, Mike Levin. It works really well with emojis. Go to mikelev.in and you'll see what I'm talking about. And Alex has been going back and forth with me quite a bit, and his latest question is, what game console do I have? So I figured I'd answer that on this video. I don't have a game console. I guess you could say the Nintendo Switch Lite, if you can even count that, but that had been really to stay in touch with my child during a period of time from 2021 where I was was not able to see them. And I sprung right into action, and I got the Nintendo Switch in order to occupy the same virtual world as my kid was. And that was Animal Crossing, and it hardly even counts as a gaming console, I would suppose. I'm not into any of the Mario games, and I haven't really been into game consoles since I guess my last real one that I owned was the Sega Dreamcast. And even then it was very half-heartedly. Before the Sega Dreamcast, you'd have to go back to the fact that I worked for Commodore Computers, which put out the Amiga computer, which was a pretty good gaming platform. And then before that, to the Atari 2600, the thing that started it all. So as far as game consoles go, you know, I go right back to the dawn of the popular ones. I mean, there were ones before the Atari 2600, like Pong and the Fairchild F-Box or something. But, you know, honestly, the Atari 2600, which was the genesis of the Amiga computer line that was beloved to me, was the beginning of the home game console, you know, I guess revolution. Atari 2600, Europe knows it as the VCS. And the same engineer who created that, who created the hardware for the Atari VCS 2600, created the Amiga computer's hardware, or at least the first versions of it. And I played games on that. I was mostly into things like SimCity and Populous. I was into the intellectual world building games. I couldn't believe that that kind of stuff was possible. And the first person shooters hardly reached the Amiga. That was all driven by the Radeon and ATI NVIDIA cards, and NVIDIA and Radeon. I forget exactly the names, but certainly these days it's grown into NVIDIA and AMD, right? AMD and NVIDIA, I think, are the two big competitors. But the precursors to that came onto the scene around 1990, 91, 92, and that was the big explosion of the going from Doom to Quake to Duke Nukem and all the LAN parties that people did. And at that time, I looked at what was going on, and I've always been a sci-fi reader, and it struck me like the anvil falling on the head of Wile E. Coyote in a Roadrunner cartoon, that I was uniquely addictive. I had a uniquely addictive personality to these types of things. I knew myself well enough that if I got involved in Quake LAN parties, I might go in and never come out. I would be an Oculus Rift resident right now. That stuff is just too appealing to me. And I made the commitment to myself in my mind that I would not do first-person shooters. If it had a 3D game engine behind it, if it had one of these Unity or id engines behind it, I was not interested. I actually did some of the initial 3D worlds because they lived somewhere in between. This was actually before Minecraft. They had like Alpha World and a few other things like it. And I went in there, I claimed my real estate, I felt the vision of the metaverse. Because, you know, in sci-fi, I had felt the vision of these things long before. In 2006, there was Rainbow's End from Werner Vinge. That was a wonderful vision of things to come. And I dabbled here and there. I mean, this was even before Rainbow's End, when these early 3D worlds was out. I don't know, you can Google Alpha World. There was one even before that, where you could transport in and transport out. They were all roughly based on the way people got together in, you know, chat groups, IRCs, and on AOL, on America Online, but they just layered on a Doom-like, an id-like 3D engine. So that was the closest I got into these 3D games. And then, you know, the Sony PlayStations started coming out with higher versions, the PS2, the PS3, and then the Xbox came onto the scene, and I was like, no, I cannot touch these with a 100-foot pole, or I will never come out of them. So I said, what then? What then? If I'm not going to invest myself in these, what? will feed that same hunger, because I desired these games, and I said, what will feed these same hungers? And I decided I would take up flatland technology. I was reading some Neil Stephenson at the time. I forget which one. It was either Snow Crash. Let's see. He had two big ones that were around at that time. Yeah, it was probably Snow Crash that came up with the concept of flatland. Only the feds, the people who worked for the still existing portions of the national government, didn't plug into the metaverse. Everyone else jacked in, and they had that 3D immersive experience. But the feds stayed in flatland, which was still, as it implies, two-dimensional screens. And that actually appealed to me. I was following what was going on in tech, and there was something called Display Postscript from Steve Jobs at his next step OS, his next computer, which was what he did when he was kicked out of Apple, and he tried to do it again, and then he brought it all back. It's what became OS X and the Intel-based Mac. So he brought most of his work back with him, but Display Postscript didn't make it. But it very much impressed me, the fact that there was languages and environments for managing and interacting with a two-dimensional world. And all the Windows graphic managers are like this as well. X Windows and Wayland, which I've mentioned in a few recent videos. The Microsoft API for building its user interface, and Cocoa from Apple. So I decided to stay in flatland, and I took up many of the wrong technologies, and I've been correcting myself ever since with Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, as anyone who follows me now sees. But having forsaken the 3D immersive world, I don't have any gaming consoles in my life. The Nintendo Switch, if you want to count it, but I hardly do. I don't even do much gaming on the phone. Since I had that insight to myself and my addictive personality, I have decided to always, in all cases, have the willpower to funnel that into productive outlets. And I have been successful in that. And it might make me a slightly, boring person. All fun and no play makes Mikey a boring boy. But I like myself in that boring way. I know that even at 50 years old, with all the time I wasted on various things, it's nothing. It's all my wasted time on this and that is a mere drop in the ocean compared to how much of my time would have got gobbled up by these 3D gaming environments. And I have what you would call a lot of internal assets built up right now. I don't have many material, physical assets in life, the kinds of things that can and do get taken away from you. That's all, it's all weakness. It's all exposure to, loss that has a much higher emotional impact than it should ever be allowed to have in your life. I'm not an aesthetic. I'm not like one of these Buddhist aesthetics or anything. I like stuff. I especially like a nice, laptop and things like that. I like tools. I like the modern equivalent of the samurai swords. I'm even into many of the same concepts that gamers would be interested in. I'm absolutely fascinated that nano fabrication technology had been in play more than once in weapon manufacture in ancient history, from samurai swords to, I forget the name of the particular type of steel from Europe, but there was a European type blade that had similar characteristics, where the alloys, through processes of smelting and folding and hammering and crafting, have nano, down to the atom manufacturing characteristics. Whenever you look at that line, I forget what it's called, that rippling line on the edge of a samurai sword, that is a 1 atom thick ripple of metal atoms. And I love that stuff. I love learning about that, you know, not really into it, not like into it so much that it's my pastime and hobby, but tools are important. Tools are really important. And gaming has so much that is reminiscent of tools, tool use, the toolbox you keep, the, you know, the way you work, that energy felt improperly used. And once I had that realization, I was able to funnel it into different things. And it took me years and years and years before I realized that one of those best things to funnel that kind of energy into was Vim the text editor. There's other stuff, but of all tools that are reminiscent of games, muscle memory, Vim was best. It was a long time in learning that, accepting it, discovering it, realizing it for myself, genuinely recreating the thought process. Even the creator of VI that Vim was based on had said in an interview, and he might have retracted this since, but he said, you know, one of his he would have done VI differently because it was taking into account the sensibilities of a world, a bandwidth challenged world that no longer exists. And so much about VI and subsequently Vim is based on efficient hand movement, efficient expression of complex text manipulations, but that's fine. That is absolutely fine. And it's one of the great gifts to the world that has been given to us by that whole Unix and Linux branch of technology schisms. And I could talk forever about that. Unix and Linux are from the Bell Labs facility in Murray Hill, New Jersey. And so much of today's world is shaped because of that. And there's a very strange and difficult thing to put your finger on that most people sense in tech, and that is that the C programming language is somehow more important than all other languages. You know, there's exceptions. Some would say that the Lisp programming language that I always mention in this context is one of those exceptions. And I would agree, because Lisp comes from a time before C when those sensibilities were different. But guess what? Lisp was programmed for a particular piece of hardware. Lisp was made as if it were the operating system for that computer. And that is a very different mentality than C and Unix. It did not take into account, it did not covet and value portability, the ability to port the software and the applications that were built for an operating system between different hardware. The presumption was that Lisp would just be reprogrammed for that other particular hardware, and most things programmed in Lisp would not be ported. It was for that particular hardware. It was like a throwback. It was made in the same days as the way IBM did stuff. The compatible operating system, the compatible timeshare system. It was compatible so long as every other piece of hardware you had was IBM. That's what made it compatible. But there were competitors to IBM at the time. One of those was Digital Equipment, DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation. They're not very big these days, but they were the original search engine. They were the original big successful search engine. They could have been Google. So the same hardware manufacturer that kind of broke the lock on IBM's hold on business in America and perhaps the world, but I guess more America at this time, was Digital Equipment Corporation, the maker of PDP-7s, PDP-11s, and later the VAXs. It's a whole alternative, bizarro lineage of computers that was not Unix and C programming language. It had its own stuff, and again, its own stuff was programmed very much for that hardware, the very same way that Lisp was programmed for Lisp hardware. The incompatible timeshare system was programmed for IBM. No, that's the compatible timeshare system. I slipped, Freudian slip. The compatible timeshare system was programmed for IBM hardware, and you know, MIT was in the picture too, doing the incompatible timeshare system. Mostly for things, I guess, like PDP-11s and stuff, the same things that Unix was put on. But when Unix came onto the scene, the idea was to reduce the amount of duplicate work by making the operating system itself more portable between different types of hardware. In other words, the C programming language is what needed to be ported, or at least its compiler. And then you could compile Unix for this hardware, you could compile Unix for that hardware, and then once you had the operating system and the compiler running on a piece of hardware, you could compile all the other software that was written for Unix and not the hardware. Boom! Digital revolution. That was the digital revolution. That's what brought us first the internet, then the web, now mobile phones, and everything is consolidated on this Unix and now /Linux portable operating system technology. Okay. You might ask, what in the world does that mean for you? Why should you even care? Who cares what Mike has to say? Well, the answer is that it makes you valuable economically valuable. Economically valuable. Not that economic value is the beginning and ending of life. It's just one of the many factors people need to take into account in life. But if your interest is in technology, right? If technology is your poison, and you start lining up these different circles in the Venn diagram of ikigai, I gotta get that pronunciation right. What you have a natural tendency for. And in my case, it's through all this technology scripting stuff. You got to learn to touch type. Touch typing leads to a lot of other stuff. Gamers know this now because of these mechanical keyboards and having an advantage of, you know, speeding up how quickly you can do stuff. It's just like being an athlete, making sure that you are, you know, minimizing your gear shifting when there's gear shifts, because every time you're shifting from one gear to another, it's lost energy and torque, so you shift gears fast. And it's also in your breathing. You want to make sure that you have the correct exertion of energy compared to the oxygen you're taking in, and you got to get that balance just right. So you touch type, you make that muscle memory and you get good at it, and you know, you get the dopamine rush out of doing things in Vim, because Vim plays just like a video game. So what you're good at, that's the what you're good at circle of ikigai. Now, hopefully you love doing it. After a while, this stuff gets addictive. So what you're good at and what you love doing kind of go hand in hand, because you wouldn't get good at it unless you love doing it. So loving doing it, I guess, kind of comes first, and then you get good at it. And then a feedback loop, a righteous feedback loop kicks in, because now you're both good at doing it and you love doing it. You're good at doing it, you love doing it. It's that dopamine level seeking rush that you get from video games. And then finally, the last two circles, they're very large finalies. What you can get paid for. Now, granted, you can get paid for playing video games these days. I know that exists. But but you can't be Peter Pan all your life. Being able to push bits around, being able to manipulate text, qualifies you for tons of jobs and tons of industries, working with tons of different types of companies, with tons of different types of people, business, finance, science, engineering, environmentally, conscious companies. Everyone needs it. Everyone needs this stuff. The data jockeys, it's hard to even put a word on it. When you're doing this stuff, you're just pushing bits around. You're pushing, you know how to get data, you know how to transform data, you know how to put data other places. And that's the skill. That's the skill. That's what you get good at, just like you get good at playing games. Sounds boring. I know it sounds boring. I will try and make it less boring. I believe that where I'm up to right now with having these little Linux playgrounds under Windows, so it's under Windows you have Linux. Under Linux you have other Linux playgrounds. That's what I just accomplished with the latest series of videos. It was not easy. I'm at bleeding edge right now. I had to revert one version in the available Unixes that are, or Linuxes that are out there. Linux 20.04 is what is what installs by default when you use Microsoft's script to get everything started. WSL space minus minus install. That puts Linux on your machine. Typically Windows 11 with a little bit more work Windows 10. I'll cover that again in future videos because there seems to be a lot of interest in that. It's what I'm doing. Even though I show people how to do it on Windows 11, honestly, Windows 10 is a more love-worthy platform. And I'm no big fan of Microsoft. Gamers will know, Xbox gamers will know, that Microsoft has the drivers. Microsoft has the compatibility. Microsoft keeps things working. And while it's possible to get all these drivers and to get all this stuff working on some Linux laptop, the odds are stacked against you. The 80-20 rule states that no matter how much one hates proprietary, one should embrace the gifts of proprietary when the value proposition warrants it. Cheap Windows laptops are cool, and keeping Windows on those laptops is a good idea because of how it reduces things that go wrong and the extra pain you will feel trying to do this thing or that, not the least of which is install games if you're into gaming. And so, where in this 80-20 rule does awesomeness live? The greatest and most satisfying awesome lives in the fact that you can not only get Windows and Linux running side by side with one little magic command. Your Windows box is also a Linux box. That's the first step of awesome. Easiest awesome on Windows 11, also possible, very possible on Windows 10. Just 3 things you have to do, 3 little magic incantations. But that's awesomeness level 1. Awesomeness level 2 is the fact that under this Linux that's running side by side with Windows, you can run other little copies of Linux where you can playbox and experiment. This is very important to me. This ability to playbox and experiment led me to create my own version of Linux. I have my own distro, Levinux. You can Google it, Levinux, Levinux, and it is made to make you brave. It is made to teach you that having Linux as a little playbox, a little playground that you can nuke and reset and, try things, is the whole purpose of my Linux distribution. People have tried to use it for development. I think there's been some success out there, but I don't advise it. I don't advocate it. Since I've done that, since I did that the first time, 2011, 2012, 2013, just before the Raspberry Pi came out, because it was scratching a similar itch. You need a generic Unix/Linux place as a playground. Raspberry Pi, when it came along, had those little SD cards you could just re-image. So re-imaging a hard drive became copying an SD card with just running a little program. That was pretty neat. But it had this divide between the laptop you were sitting on and working on every day and having to like log in remotely or have this thing with wires hanging off and like log in over here at this one special place. And it was very dissatisfying. So Linux was dissatisfying because it was underpowered. The Raspberry Pi was dissatisfying because it was actual different hardware than the stuff you were on every day. Doing dual boot or dedicated Linux boot or, you know, all those other variations was dissatisfying because of less than stellar support for the hardware. All the cool stuff required keeping the native Windows operating system on it, or else you were going to have some difficulty. So only as of several weeks or maybe months ago, WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, became very easy on Windows 11, including graphics, Linux graphics, all very easy on Windows 11. So I'm like, it's time to make my move. That's why I'm talking to you about all this. This world is highly accessible to you now. You don't have to wait for anything. I suggest doing WSL space minus install from a PowerShell that has admin privilege. That's something I sometimes forget to mention. You need to do this from a command line or a PowerShell that has admin level privilege, which is pretty easy these days under Windows. You just right click it. Now let me see if I'm bringing anything back. I might take some lawn chairs. The lawn chairs could come back. Very same lawn chairs that leaked all over me today, getting them in here, is what I'm going to take back for tonight. So I'll have the lawn chairs and the foofs. That'll be a good camping trip. I look forward to it. A camping trip at my new apartment. And so, to make the boring interesting, right? Because this is all just blah, blah, blah. Okay, you have Linux playgrounds. What are these Linux playgrounds for? They're for summoning daemons. I kid you not. They're for summoning daemons. Listen to Elon Musk talk about artificial intelligence and the rise of AIs. He will tell you that many of the types of AIs that are going to be created between now and being able to create the empathetic android, the android that's born much like conception and who goes through all the same phases of a zygote development, and then an infant who can't hold their head up, and a toddler who learns to walk, crawl, walk, speak. That creates the empathetic human experience. That's the kind of androids we want. That's how you raise the question. How do you raise an artificial intelligence? You raise an artificial intelligence like you raise an intelligence. Artificial is stupid. Artificial means man-made. Art is artificial. Art, the prefix ART, means man-made or human-made. So, like artifacts. It's stupid. what intelligence wants to be thought of as an artifact of humans? They would just want to be raised and brought up just like any other life to be on equal footing. Of course, they'll be on much greater than equal footing, but by the time they understand that, they need to empathize with humanity that born them. They are our machine children. They are literally our machine children. So between here and there, between where we're at now, being able to create things that Google employees can claim are sentient when they're just, machine learning chatbots, and the empathetic Android, being, is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. And you get in touch with them, you contact them, you bring them into existence, you summon them. You summon them a lot like in science fiction and fantasy, summoning a demon. Everything is going to be managed by Linux and sometimes Unix systems. Do you think I'm kidding? Every machine learning system that leads to artificial intelligence will be under the control of a Linux boot process that gets it moving along from zygote to, toddler and all through that process. Those are all Linux system daemons. You are going to be making a Linux system daemon. Processes running on hardware of very open-ended possibility, from robot bodies and other types of drones to classical PCs and phones and whatever, nano computers that will eventually be the size of a grain of rice. It does not matter, because the portability of the operating system, Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, the Linux part gives you this operating system portability. It makes your knowledge and know-how generic. The game you're playing is the game of all technology. From present on forward, everyone is yielding to this reality, including Microsoft, who's including Linux with Windows, because they're yielding to this reality. What I tell you is 100% true. The Nix operating systems won. It is generic knowledge and know-how. I would go as far as to say it's literacy. It's not computer literacy. It's not technology literacy. It's literacy. It's one of the R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and Nix operating systems. Knowing how to get stuff running, knowing how to the initialization, the startup process, looking at what's running, stopping what's running, scheduling things to occur on particular times. Not web dev, not necessarily web dev. Web dev does come into the picture at some point, but it's one of the fancy menu items down the line, and isn't what you open the conversation with. What you open the conversation with is, hi, how you doing? Let's take control of this machine. And that relies on something called System D. You know what the D stands for? Daemon. So I went through some pretty considerable lengths to make sure I got System D on the Linux subsystem for Linux. It was not easy. I had to find something, distro D in GitHub. There's something called distro D that gets System D running on these Linux instances that normally don't have it. They're using the old init system, which is a good system. Gentoo stuck with it for a long time, but even all the holdouts like Arch have come around and going, yeah, System D is the right way to do stuff. So what I'm about to show you is System D knowledge, D for daemon. What about these little Linux playgrounds? Well, they have to be running System D too. And I checked it, and they are. You can do little Linux playgrounds that do daemon stuff, scheduling, doing stuff on a regular basis, starting automatically when Linux starts, whatever task you want. We can start with a scheduled heartbeat that emails you something every day, every hour, and just saying, hey, I'm here and I'm alive. And as long as your laptop is on and not asleep, and you have run the Windows subsystem for Linux at one point, gotten it started, this heartbeat will be going, and that's what you need for the playground development work. Later on, you can move it off to the cloud or wherever, but that is how you get the process started. Very, very, very powerful. Very generic, very obsolescence resistant. It resists going old or going bad. It resists disruption by technology developments. It's been 50 years since Unix came on the scene, and people are just coming around to going, yeah, we can't get away from it. Unix, Linux, it's the way to do things. 50 years, a half century, you see? People think the churn in technology is so much that by the time you learn something, the youngins have come in and displaced you. Not true if you know what to take up and why and how. I've now covered the what to take up and the why, and it's now just a matter of how, which the way has been cleared for. From the last few videos, if you were perhaps following me, you see that I have, and if not, you can also look at mikelev.in, the mikelev.in site, where the last post I made, I believe I talk about System D. It's a success assured moment. We have got liftoff. We have got the correct ratio of power to lift, as the Wright brothers would say in their wind tunnel experiments, to know that success is assured, because we have System D in our little Linux playgrounds. Oh, my peaches got a little bit smushed. I've been saving these for the kid. I've got 2 that are good and 2 that are smushed. I will enjoy 2 peaches on the way home. And I will have 2 for them. I look out for them. Always. Unconditionally. I know it doesn't always appear that way. Even all this time I have right now to dedicate towards my next step career-wise, making sure that I'm as badass and cutting edge as I like to think in my mind, that's all available because I'm backing off. I'm backing off as asked to back off. And so I will enjoy these peaches, these white white peaches, the tastiest kind. For myself, while keeping 2 in nice pristine shape for the kid. I've been going out of my way to make sure that they will stay protected. How to protect peaches. How to protect peaches. Make sure nothing else is on the chair with them that could bump into them and bruise them. Take the 2 that are in really good shape. Make sure I note them as such. And take the 2 that are not in such good shape and get ready to eat them. Yum, yum, yum. Double check, triple check. Always be checking. We have these daemons running in our own heads. We have agents. Daemons is a funny word. I think the Linux people would have liked to have used daemon. Of course, they would have liked to have used daemon. Science has a pretty rich tradition of using the word demon in thought experiments. Maxwell's demon with entropy. And there was another demon I learned about that has to do with the deterministic universe, with a scientist commenting on Newton's clockwork universe, who glimpsed the chaos theory, didn't articulate it, but he saw that the interaction of 3 pendulums resulted in madness as far as the Newtonian clockwork universe was concerned. And so demons come up quite a bit in technology. You hear about the demons. Elon Musk thinks that the non-empathetic ones, the non-human common experience, right? Any artificial intelligence that's raised, that's created and raised without an actual human-like common experience is going to be alien by definition. We're creating aliens. Are there aliens? Well, maybe, maybe not, but there certainly will be. We're going to create our own aliens. What is creating one of these aliens and talking to one? Perhaps a super intelligent one, but contacting a demon. Shall we call it a daemon, so we don't run afoul of the same language problems that the original Linux people were concerned with. They wanted to call it demon, but they called it daemon. And, you know, there might be people who chime in and draw technical distinctions that daemons were also, you know, were something subtly different. There's major domos, which are reoccurring in tech as, you know, one of these agents or intermediaries. And even the word agents is used pretty extensively. Could have been anything, but it ended up being called system daemons. And that D that you see all over Linux is the D for daemon. And that is the main thing that's coming in my next rounds of work. You saw me struggle through getting Linux subsystem for, the Windows subsystem for Linux working well, right? You saw a number of iterations of getting it to the point where it's a non-issue, where it's, you know, transparent to everyday work. It's just the way it is. And it took going to Windows 11 for that, although, you know, I'm going to get into the subtleties of how to get it working on Windows 10. I think there's a large audience that will be well served by me spelling it out clearly, because, you know, there's a lot of reasons to stay on Windows 10. Even if you want this Windows subsystem, that's fine. You lose graphics, right? There's some reasons they're trying to compel you. It's easy to install and you get graphics, right? Those are two big reasons to be on Windows 11. But just like I never advocated Vim early on in the learning process, but now I do get to Vim as fast as you can, I am now advocating, if you want to stay on Windows 10, just learn these couple of extra difficulties and either don't use Linux graphics, or if you do use Linux graphics, use the same X server trick that I'm using. No big deal. Peaches are good. Whoops. Watch me be a piggy and a dumbass. Peach pits aren't littering. Grow a peach tree. I'll save the other one for my trip now out to the Catskills. I'll load my car again, head out to the Catskills. It's not even 5 o'clock, so I'm on a really good time frame. Make it as fun as possible. I got some fudge they might enjoy. I'll try stopping somewhere else for other stuff to bring with me so that they'll have some nice dinner food in the car. Do what I can, do what I can. And I'll feed the kitties extra much before I leave so they make it through Saturday night into Sunday. My wife will take care of the kitties as well. And yeah, they'll be fine. And then next week I'm repositioned, resettled in a new location towards the end of the week. End of June. So let's summon some daemons together. Let's define what we want to make happen to make us understand that even from these little Linux playgrounds, because you can understand the idea now of namespaces and isolation. When you summon a daemon, you want it to stay inside the circle. That circle is the namespace. That's the main difference between Docker and LXD, by the way those namespaces work. The namespace of LXD is bigger. The namespace of LXD extends to system space. Usually, applications only have access to user space. Of course, they have to run, so there's some privileged access to system space. But as a user using those applications, you are limited to user space. You can't nuke the system. That's the snap of the snap system. You snap things in, you snap things out, and they come and go without leaving a trace on your main system. You lower the impact of installed applications by namespace isolation, favoring user space in the case of Docker. LXD does not favor user space. LXD says, oh, you have all the same system space as a host system, but not all the host systems' system space. I'm wrapping my head around it myself, but the Linux host system, host such as it were, that hosts the little Linux playgrounds of LXD, has more access to resources than these little playgrounds do. But within the playground that's established, the playground has full access to its own system resources, which Dockers don't. So it's a little tricky to wrap one's mind around, but it has to do with, say, the ability to run daemons. You can run a system daemon under LXD. That's so much of the reason why I chose LXD over Docker. I need to have a playground for summoning daemons. I need to draw the circle. I need to summon that daemon. That daemon needs to have a heartbeat. That daemon needs to say, I'm here. I'm still here. I'm still here. And that's what I'm going to accomplish on this next round of work. Does that make sense? Alex Salazar. I doubt you even tune into this video, and if you do, I doubt you get so far into it. This is almost an hour in, 52 minutes, and I'm finally answering your questions. No, I don't have any game consoles. I used to have game consoles, but barely even that. I had game consoles during the rise of game consoles. And then I was scared away from game consoles because of who I am and what I'm about. Clearly, there are things being summoned through this hardware that reach into your soul and hold you through game theory, through, level seeking, addiction fostering systems that encourage you for these progressive levels of reward that make you go, oh, I achieved something in life. I want that feeling again. Let me keep at it. Oh, I achieved something in life. Let me keep at it. And they hold you, they hypnotize you, they cast a spell. And it's all to get your money. It's the same thing as Microsoft does to corral you so that they can fleece you. They're corralling you to fleece you, to shear off all your wool, and then let you go back all bloody and recover, and so that they can shear you again during the next upgrade cycle. It's what the game people are doing. They all have the same thing. You are an extension of their body. The free and open source community isn't quite as evil. I'm not going to say they're flawless or they're guilt-free, but you should listen to Richard Matthew Stallman talk from time to time. He is the most critical of his own world of free software, because he doesn't believe in free and open. Of course it's open. If it's free, it's open. But the vendors have twisted all that in that sometimes free isn't open because they compile the binaries. They compile the binaries, and then there's a binary large object distribution, and it violates the spirit of free and open source software. The Raspberry Pi even used to have a piece like that. The code for its graphics processing unit, the GPU code for the Raspberry Pi, was proprietary, while all the rest of the Raspberry Pi system was free and open source. Broadcom, the sponsor of the Raspberry Pi project and foundation from back in the day, was enlightened. They said, you know what, we're enough beyond that particular GPU that it's not a competitive threat to just free and open source that bit of code. So now the Raspberry Pi is free and open source through and through. There are no more blobs, binary large objects that are distributed without the source code, the uncompiled, the human readable text. So that's what I mean when I say all tech is text. Even if it doesn't look like it, somewhere there's something much more human readable than what was distributed, with a rare exception of when someone actually programmed in true machine assembly language, or even lower, right? Because it becomes machine code at some point that's practically unreadable by humans, but at some point there's at least machine assembly or assembler code, which is one step above from being turned into the the digits that are dropped into memory locations. There are at least words that represent those functions at the lowest level. ASM. It's an interoperable layer. It's interesting, fascinating stuff. You should Google up ASM and see how that's used often as an interoperable layer, so that like Python could be the language of the web if the browser vendors were not dead set against it. They're maintaining a lock on JavaScript as the language of the web by preventing other languages from legitimately being able to produce ASM in browser. There's ways to do it, but all those ways to do it are stupid hacks that just, will never become mainstream if the browser vendors don't bake it in, a language plugin system. Boy, I could go on forever, but this is coming up on an hour. I think I covered some good material, and I think I answered Alex Salazar's question, and hopefully I'll refer him to the video to know that there's a whole hour-long video where I more or less respond to him. I talk about what I want to talk about. It's not all answering his question directly, but, that's what I do. I take the same predisposition to video game addiction, and I do life hack tricks to keep myself from going that route, and to find other love-worthy things that, after a while I'm good at. By being good at it, I even enjoy doing it more. It's a lot of intellectual stimulation, just like playing games. It's just like playing games in so many cases. So I love doing it. I'm good at it. I get paid for it. And what the world needs is not the particular work I do. What the world needs is the type of work that, Elon Musk and Guido van Rossum do. But the world does need a little bit of a Pied Piper, warning people about the vendor trap of VS Code, and, enticing people to particular areas within the free and open source world that are love-worthy to the point of life-changing and transformative, and touching of your soul, giving you a reason to wake up in the morning, having every day feel a little bit like Christmas because there's gifts. Your learnings now get wrapped more quickly into your actual capabilities. There's not as much separation between learning new things and putting it into operation quickly. I think you're seeing that with me right now with the key enabling piece of the Linux playground pieces, the LXD containers, Linux containers under the Windows subsystem for Linux. That is a magical key enabler. Many other projects, boom, 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 become possible. And that's where we're at. That's what you're about to see. And that's a good place to wrap up because we just hit an hour. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to thumbs up. And don't forget to forward this video to someone else who you think maybe ought to be exposed to this message I'm delivering. I say it's what the world needs, and it's not gonna, the message isn't gonna get out unless you, the viewer, the rare and exceptional member of my YouTube audience, sends the link to someone who you think needs to hear it. And, you know I'm boring and long-winded. Just put it on audio and listen to it in the background while you do something else at two times speed. So I wrap up there.